More than 300 Sewage and Water Board employees were at their posts when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans on August 29, 2005. And they stayed through the catastrophic flooding that engulfed 80% of New Orleans after the levees broke. These dedicated and heroic employees were first responders providing critical emergency sewerage and water board system restorations, while in many instances fighting for their own survival and the survival of others. Their valiant efforts must not be forgotten but preserved for austerity as a testament to the courage, tenacity, and dedication of these employees in the face of overwhelming odds. This is Marcia StMartin, former executive director of the Sewage and Water Board. Let me take you back to 2005, 2 days after the storm hit. I don't know if you remember this or not, but you and I were talking on the telephone, and I think it was a live newscast, and I might have been one of the first news reporters you talked to, and I was going, Marcia, what happened? How did the Sewage and Water Board allow this to happen? How much water was there? And you said, Norman, I'm not a geologist. I'm not a geologist. And at that time, in my mind, because I hadn't seen anything, we were like in the dark. I was in Jackson, Mississippi, because our tower was under 25 feet of water in Chalmette, so we couldn't broadcast locally. We had to broadcast from Jackson, Mississippi. I had no concept of what had happened. I thought it was a Sewage and Water Board problem. So, you see where I was coming from?
Well, okay. I don't even remember the interview, but you know, it definitely was not a Sewage and Water Board problem. It was a failure of the federal levee system, and it was obvious that you know, the city was flooded as a result of the failure of the federal levee system. But a great gentleman that I worked with, G. Joseph Sullivan, that afternoon of Monday the 29th had calculated how long it was going to take for this water to equalize. And the water needed to equalize between the lake and the city in order for the water to stop coming in. And he projected it was going to equalize probably on that Friday afternoon about 2 o'clock. And
wow.
He was
4
dead.
days later.
He was dead on the money. He did that on Monday the 29th, probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was probably within 2 hours of the water actually equalizing in the city. Brilliant engineer, just a brilliant engineer.
I remember Joe. I remember him well because he knew the system like the back of his hand.
Not only do you know the system by the back of his hand, he designed most of the modern day pumps. You know, the pumps go back to A. Bowen Wood, the pumps go back to the 1800s, but everything that was built from 1972 forward was a Joe Sullivan design and a Joe Sullivan implementation. So just a brilliant engineer and just a viable asset to the Sewage and Water Board in the city of New Orleans.
Where were you during this whole process when the storm hit?
Well, on August the 28th, I entered my office, which was a Sunday afternoon, after checking in with the team. We had a team of 300 plus, just wonderful men and women who work for the Sewage and Water Board, stationed throughout the city of New Orleans, at drainage pump stations, at the sewage treatment plant, at the water purification plants, at our central yard facilities, our power generation and power distribution facility. So on the 29th, I was in my office. I was in my office with probably a half a dozen employees and contractors, and we were the nerve center of the Sewage and Water Board, monitoring the operations, being able to respond to what we thought was going to be a minor rain event, because the storm was not predicted to produce a lot of rain. We thought we would do a small amount of pumping. Our biggest concern, of course, was the loss of power. But we knew we had the ability to generate power. We knew we had enough ability to generate power to support the drinking water system and the wastewater system of both the East and West Bank. I think one of the facts that a lot of people don't know about the Sewage and Water Board's power system is that we have 2 power lines between the West Bank and the East Bank, so that the Sewage and Water Board can move power from the East to the West Bank in addition to generating power on the West Bank.
Wow, I had no idea.
Right.
I had no idea. So you were pretty comfortable.
We were very comfortable, and we were very comfortable with the quality of the system that had been designed going back to the 1800s. You know, New Orleans is below sea level, a great part of New Orleans is below sea level. We have survived multiple hurricanes, and we knew we had the ability to remove any amount of rainwater that fell in the city of New Orleans. Now, it may have taken a few days because of the ability to pump a half inch per hour, for the first 4 hours, but we knew we could accomplish that task. The task that was impossible to accomplish was to dewater the city immediately after Lake Pontchartrain and Intercoastal Waterway was in the city of New Orleans. We could not begin the dewatering process until the breaches in the levee system was closed.
In your wildest dream, did you ever imagine being confronted with that type of situation?
As part of our preparation, we were prepared to dewater the city if there was a levee overtopping. There was always a scenario of the possibility of a river breach and a possibility of a levee breach in the coastal waterway or Lake Pontchartrain levee. So that was part of our training. Now, you would hope that you never have to experience that, and we knew very well the system was not designed to respond immediately to that type of event. But when normally we kind of think about it, after the breaches were closed, the men and women of the Surgeon Water Board dewatered the city very, very quickly. Concurrently with the levees being closed, the men and women who were working began drying and baking motors. So once we were able to begin pumping, we pumped very rapidly, with the understanding and a clear knowledge. And it was a decision that I made, and a decision that Joe Sullivan made, that we would actually destroy the motors that we had dried and baked, because salt water was very destructive. And so we prepared the motors, we dewatered the city, and then we went about taking them out of service one by one and restore them again.
What did you fear mostly about the aftermath of the storm when the levees broke?
My biggest fear was for the safety of the team I was responsible for. The team of 300 plus men and women who was gathered throughout the city of New Orleans. My earliest knowledge of a problem was about 5 a.m. on Monday, August the 29th, when a team that was working at Station 5, and Station 5 is located in the Lower Ninth Ward, had reported on the radio that a wall of water was coming in the building and that they were going to climb to the rafters. And at that point, we lost contact with that team.
What were you thinking then?
That maybe we had lost that team. Pump stations are probably, and I'm going to just guess, the height of the roof is probably 3 to 4 stories. To be able to access that in a dangerous situation of water coming in, be able to climb to the top, be able to protect themselves, and then eventually leave that pump station. And we had a team working at the wastewater treatment plant, again with the Lower Ninth Ward. We had a team working at another drainage pump station. We had teams throughout the city of New Orleans. So my biggest fear, until I could actually touch every employee, was for their safety.
I was on the phone with Brenda, I think, when you ran in. Did you actually run in and say that water is coming?
I actually ran in. You know how short I am, so you can imagine how many steps it took for me to run in. But Brenda and the public relations team and the IT team was headquarters in our conference room, in the boardroom. And it was in my office monitoring the radio, and I literally ran in and said, we've got a challenge. There's water coming into the pump station in the Lower Ninth Ward, and then immediately ran up the steps to connect with Mrs. Sullivan, and we began our strategy at that point as to how we were going to respond to ensure, number one, the safety of the team, but try to develop an understanding of what was happening.
How long did it take you to conceptualize what was taking place and then what to do about it?
The Surgeon Water Board has a highly sophisticated, dependable communication system. And it was a 800 megahertz radio system that contractors had encouraged us to abandon many, many years before, but worked. Okay, it was a manual communication system. So we immediately, throughout the night and throughout the day, was in contact with the drainage pump stations and the water purification plants, the other facilities. So we began to aggregate that information very quickly. And at that point, I would say within a couple of hours, we realized that there was a significant amount of water in the city. We began to lose water pressure at the water purification plant. Immediately we thought maybe a large tree because of the way the system is monitored. The first indication was not the lower Ninth Ward that we lost water pressure, but in the City Park area, that maybe a large tree had toppled and damaged a major water transmission line. So as we began to aggregate that information, we knew that there was water in every part of the city. We didn't know the reason there was water in every part of the city. It wasn't until several hours later that reports began to come in from the Corps of Engineers, from the levee districts, from other areas that there definitely was a breach. But then we realized that there was multiple breaches throughout the city of New Orleans and throughout St. Bernard Parish and throughout Plaquemine Parish. Water does not know geographic boundaries. It doesn't stop at a parish line. So it's important to begin to coordinate and understand what was happening within the region. And I'm going to say within a matter of hours, it was obvious that the entire city was going to be flooded. Okay, so at that point, it became a question of at what point will the water equalize in the city? And what do we do to begin to prepare, because we had water in all the pump stations. We began to prepare to be able to dewater the city. We were very concerned about the power generation plant. The power generation plant is key to being able to operate, because we do know that commercial power isn't available during major natural disasters. That's why the Surgeon Water Board developed a power generation and a power distribution system. There's hundreds of miles of power lines that are encased in cable underground. The Surgeon Water Board system is not dependent on overhead lines, like commercial power is dependent upon overhead lines. So how do we begin to assemble all those resources and move forward? Mr. Sullivan was able to calculate at what point we were going to not have the ability to generate power, because water was coming into the power generation facility. And that happened about 6 a.m. on August the 31st. So we were able to generate power and move drinking water throughout the system for a couple of days. And the wonderful men and women of the Surgeon Water Board, we had that system up and operating in several days.
What was your proudest moment?
My proudest moment was the employees who sacrificed their lives to check on their coworkers. I work with a group of men and women who are avid sportsmen, avid fishermen. So they own boats, and they were able to move boats throughout the city to check on their coworkers, but more important, to help with the recovery and to help with the evacuation of other citizens. That was my proudest moment.
Did you, as leader of the Sewage and Water Board at that time, feel the weight of the entire city on your shoulders?
You know, water is the most important staff of life. You know, we can live without electricity. We can live without cable, but we cannot live without water. And we cannot live without the ability to collect and remove wastewater. One of the decisions that was made on Sunday afternoon, August the 28th, was to dewater the wastewater system. And Sunday afternoon, I had discussions and notifications with EPA that I was taking on the responsibility of opening the valves through the wastewater system and discharging that product into the Mississippi River. You know, when the pundits talked about that New Orleans was going to be a bowl of toxic soup, it just never happened, that we would have disease rampant throughout the city. And that didn't happen because of the decision that was made to dewater the wastewater system on Sunday afternoon. So concurrently with the evacuation of the city, we were evacuating wastewater, so that when the floodwaters came in, there was not the amount of product that was in the wastewater system. Now, there was product that was still left in people's homes. Mm-hmm. animal product that was on the street. So we were able to avoid a major disaster and a major problem with illness.
And that was because of putting this plan in place.
That was because of putting the plan in place and having the courage to make the decision.
So you weren't looking to get direction from someplace. You were making the decision.
It was the courage to make the decision, to call EPA and notify them of the decision, and to move forward.
Was there ever a sense of panic?
I did not.
What kept you so calm?
What kept me so calm was confidence in the people I work with. And when there is a major problem, no matter where it is in the world, if the leader who's responsible for implementation does not demonstrate calmness, control, then the rest of the area, and the rest of the community, cannot respond to that. There's with fear. So my training as a student of the Sisters of the Holy Family, my training as a professional water administrator was to always be calm, and I never felt overwhelmed. It was a question of how do we execute, and how do we execute very, very quickly, because it was important that we restore the water systems so that people in this community would have the ability to return to the community if they decided to do that. So calmness was the quality of the day. And the entire team, the men and women of the Surgeon Water Board that was interviewed by the national media, the international media, I think that sense of calmness, sense of control was evident throughout the entire disaster.
There was a movie I guess when I was growing up as a kid, not to date myself. It's called The Greatest Story Ever Told. It was about the story of Christ. I think it was the first movie presentation of such a story. What is the greatest untold story about the Sewage and Water Board?
I think the greatest untold story about the Sewage and Water Board is the care that was taken by the employees for the people who lived around them. The Sewage and Water Board's facilities, 83 sewer pump stations, 2 water purification plants, 24 drainage pump stations, are within neighborhoods. And a lot of people did not have the ability to evacuate the city. And the men and women, while doing their job, also ensured that they were able to care for the people who were around them. And I think that's the untold story. The untold story is also the people who sacrificed not being with their families to restore the water systems for the city of New Orleans. People who work for the Sewage and Water Board did not abandon their jobs. They were on target, they were focused, and they continued.
How would you describe the recovery of the Sewage and Water Board, its status now post-Hurricane Katrina?
Well, someone asked me what did I think it was going to cost to rebuild the system. And at that point, probably on August 31st, I said we could probably be, $50 million. Well, nearly 2 billion posts.
Wow.
The system is a system that was redesigned to be resilient, to be reliable, to have a lot of redundancy in the system. With the infusion of federal resources, the infusion of just talented engineers who work for the Sewage and Water Board, the system was rebuilt to be very resilient and very reliable. And to take in consideration any future impacts of global warming as we understood it at that point, because that's something that's climate changes are happening on a daily basis, but as we understood it in 2010, in 2011, 2015, how do we rebuild the system? So the system today, I'm going to say, is more reliable. The current team of the Sewage and Water Board is completely rebuilding the power generation system, completely rebuilding by the Sewage and Water Board will be adding water towers to the system, which will prevent possible problems in the future with low water pressure. And so the system is being rebuilt smarter, It's being rebuilt with reliability and dependability. And that was a decision that was made when we began that process. And we began the rebuilding of the water systems on the afternoon of August the 29th. We were able to connect with General Electric. General Electric was a group of people who basically designed the power generation system. We flew that team in, and that team was on the ground within 4 days. And General Electric, as a national, international company, literally stopped their production lines and helped us to dry and set up a production facility on the West Bank. We were able to pull and dry those motors. So it is a dependable system. It's a dependable system today. And as the current team continue to implement the federal resources that were available through FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the system will in the future become more reliable and more dependable.
What you have described sort of countermands the opinion of some that the Sewerage and Water Board is antiquated, outdated, and a dysfunctional system that's behind the times. What do you say to people who harbor that
I'm going to
kind of...
say that when you turn on a tap in the morning, you have drinking water. When you decide to return the waste to us, it's accepted. When it rains, water is removed from the street. It's removed very, very quickly. The system is a system that was built and designed in the 1800s, but it's a system that responds to modern day technology, implementation and use of modern day technology, implementation and use of modern day engineering techniques, computer techniques, operational techniques, power generation and power distribution techniques. You know, people will say, you know, one of the, I think the interesting challenges when I manage the Sewerage and Water Board is that we like to consider ourselves a solid provider. So, and throughout the nation, throughout the world, water systems are considered to be the solid provider. So our customers don't know and don't have to think about the system unless there's a challenge. So if there is one power shortage, then out of the course of 10 years, or course of 3 years, or the course of, you know, whatever, then that becomes news. That becomes how people think about the water system, but not the day-to-day availability where you take it for granted. You know that the product is there when you decide you want to use it.
Last question. In observation of the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, what do you think the legacy of the Sewerage and Water Board is? What would you like people to take away from this 10-year observation?
That when people returned to their homes in October, they had drinking water. They had wastewater. When people began to return to their homes prior to October to begin their cleaning process, they had water that was available. It wasn't drinkable, but water was available to wash their hands, to wash their precious items, to clean their items. So I think that is the greatest legacy that I hope people will remember, that the Sewerage and Water Board was focused, the Sewerage and Water Board returned to water systems, and the Sewerage and Water Board dewatered the city very, very quickly after the federal levee system had been repaired.
Thank you. It's been a joy talking to you.
Thank you very much.
And continue to enjoy your retirement.
I am.
I know I'm going to enjoy mine.
I am.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, darling.
Okay.
The flooding of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina was the most devastating disaster to hit any U.S. city. When most of the city was evacuating, some 300 Sewerage and Water Board employees stayed on the job, facing great personal peril to respond to this devastating crisis. We salute our Katrina heroes who met the greatest challenge of their lives and found a way to rise above the storm and overcome the impact of Hurricane Katrina. The board's forces dewatered the city in 11 days after the breaches were closed and began to restore quality of life, services of water, sewer, and drainage to the city. It was the restoration of these services that made it possible for citizens to return. It was the restoration of these services that made it possible for progress to begin, going from devastation to recovery, restoration, and today, rebuilding of the most complex infrastructure in the country. Today, confidence in the Sewerage and Water Board's management and fiscal responsibility has resulted in the first water and sewer rate increases since the 1990s. These increases will be the building blocks for the development and the continuous rebuilding of the board's systems in the future.